For further perspective on the Paul Ryan extravaganza and the media coverage, joining us now here in Los Angeles, Stephanie Miller, host of Current TV's Talking Liberally and her own radio talk show, and Dan Schnur, director of the Jesse Unruh Institute of Politics at the University of Southern California and a former Republican strategist. Stephanie Miller, are you and your left-wing pals going to now pound Paul Ryan even more than Mitt Romney?
I'm not sure if this is better for comedy or better for Democrats. It's about even. I love the fact that Eddie Munster is trending on social media now, and also the term zombie-eyed granny starver, which I believe my friend Charlie Pierce coined on my show. This
would be a reference to the congressman from Wisconsin?
Yes, this would be a reference to the someone that wants to gut Medicare, which I guess they just gave up Florida.
Speaking of comedic potential, let's roll a tape of Mitt Romney introducing his running mate yesterday in Norfolk.
Join me in welcoming the next president of the United States, Paul Ryan. Every now and then I'm known to make a mistake. I did not make a mistake with this guy.
You probably know that we didn't hear it here in the studio, but that he introduced him as the next president of the United States, came back and said, oops.
Freudian slip, or some people are saying, I've read some columns saying that this is such a Hail Mary, that this is such an obvious giving up on this cycle that they're trying to prep Paul Ryan for the next time.
Dan Schnur, you would have to say that the so-called liberal press, I know many conservatives think that it is leans to their left, has been respectful, maybe surprisingly respectful of Paul Ryan so far.
Well, being the reasonable centrist that I am, Howard, I would tell you that I think the media coverage, as your previous guest talked about, has been very, very favorable, as is always the case when someone new is introduced on the national landscape.
Why is that? Is it because we want to give a little honeymoon? Is it because we don't want to appear to be beating up on somebody who's just been trotted out onto the national stage?
I think that's exactly right. And whether it was Sarah Palin 4 years ago or John Edwards 4 years before that, the media bends over backwards to give a honeymoon. It becomes a shorter and shorter one. And by this time tomorrow, Paul Ryan, I think, is going to be talking a lot less about his workout regimen and a lot more about his budget. But for a day or two, he gets a little bit of slack.
Now, I should mention that Barack Obama also introduced Joe Biden without using the word vice, so apparently it's something that happens every 4 years. Now, what the Washington pundit class is saying, it seems to me, Stephanie Miller, is that you may not like Paul Ryan's ideas, and I bet you don't.
Yes.
But at least he has a plan, and he's put himself out there with a detailed, or fairly detailed budget, some omissions in it, clearly, and the Democrats are largely ducking the debate about entitlement. So how do you take that one on?
Oh, you mean ducking as in not wanting to destroy the social safety nets? This is what drives me crazy about the mainstream media, present company accepted, of course, is that somebody puts forward a plan like that and people go, oh, well, that's bold and courageous and he's serious. It's seriously a horrible plan. I don't think there's anything, bold or refreshing about destroying Medicare, about replacing it with vouchers.
And this, I think, is going to be the focus of many stories in the coming weeks. If, on the other hand, you basically don't propose to do anything in a second Obama term about these runaway costs in Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, it's not like these programs can continue on an unsustained basis without going bankrupt.
Well, this is what George Bush tried to do with privatizing Social Security. First of all, they call it a crisis. It's not a crisis. It's not that there can't be policy ideas, but Paul Ryan's, I think, is roundly rejected by the American public. And as my favorite writer Howard Kurtz pointed out, it does nothing to address the deficit. With all these tax cuts for the rich, if you're going to run as a small government person, his budget does nothing to reduce the deficit.
It is true that while Congressman Ryan takes a big whack at a lot of domestic programs, he doesn't touch the Pentagon. He does keep tax cuts for the wealthy and then eliminates capital gains. And that's a fair point for media scrutiny, I see. But do you expect there to be, once this, two-day honeymoon is over, a kind of a media assault on what Paul Ryan has proposed and what he stands for?
There almost certainly will be. And whenever anyone comes out with a proposal that veers significantly from the status quo to the left or the right, that's inevitably the second wave of coverage, Howie, as you know. That said...
And this isn't some starry-eyed proposal. This was passed by House Republicans.
Well, that's right.
Although it was kind of symbolic because everybody in the House knew the Senate wouldn't take it up. So it was more making a statement than something that was going to become law.
And one that President Obama offered some grudging respect to early on, even though he said he differed with some of the details, recognizing Ryan for being bold and taking a more aggressive stance. That said, this is the President of the United States. That said, I think the one place where Stephanie is right is the Romney campaign took a risk here. if they were confident about the trajectory of the campaign, you would have seen a Pawlenty or a Portman or someone like that.
The shorthand that the media uses, boring white guy, I believe.
Precisely, and this isn't throwing a Hail Mary. Yeah, this isn't a Palin type of selection, but it does represent a risk. And I think, to your question, Howie, what the Romney campaign is anticipating is, okay, we're going to get beat up over Medicare. We were going to get beat up over it anyway. But maybe at some point going forward, we can pressure the media to push Obama to offer his plan for Social Security
Why
and
not
Medicare.
double down on getting beat up on Medicare? He's certainly not a boring white guy. He likes to strangle catfish with his bare hands.
The second wave risk is to get the media to say, okay, Mr. President, where's your plan for Social Security and Medicare?
It's a good debate to have, I think, and it could make this into a more substantive campaign for those of us who cover it. You're not a boring white gal, but you are a liberal in a conservative medium talk radio. I mean, in other words, it's dominated by the likes of Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham. Won't people like you and Ed Schultz and some of the few liberal national voices on talk radio be drowned out in this election?
You know, I don't think so, because you look at all of the polling, Howie, and, you know, the American public is largely with us. They do not think it's a good idea to give further tax cuts to the rich. I mean, I mean, if his choices were Bush's budget director or doubling down on Bush, Bush's plan's even worse.
You're saying you won't be drowned out because you're right.
Well, I mean, the vast majority of the American people don't want tax cuts for the rich and gutting Medicare.
But conservatives have a much louder megaphone on talk radio.
Just because you're loud doesn't mean you're right.
Do you think, briefly, Dan Schnur, that having now the Ryan pick, Wall Street Journal editorial page, Weekly Standard, National Review in Romney's corner will help him?
It probably helps him marginally. As Terry Smith mentioned earlier, while Romney is getting the support from the base of the Republican Party, it's without a great deal of enthusiasm. As Palin was designed to rev up the base, here's Ryan with an intellectual foundation to help him out.
Most of the conservative pundits did not like Mitt Romney in the primaries, as you may recall. Let me get a break. We'll continue this conversation on the other side.